Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode number 775 for the 13th of August, 2023. Richard Saunders coming to you from Oakland, California. Warm, sunny days, apart from the odd bit of fog. Coming up on this week's show, it's back to the old-fashioned skepticism with some old-fashioned ghosts. Well, maybe they're not so old-fashioned. Ghosts these days seem to be taking advantage of radio technology, the AM and FM bands of radio. Very interesting ghosts these days. I speak to Kenny Biddle, the chief investigator for the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, about ghost or spirit boxes. Now, this has been prompted by some recent TV appearances I made in Australia, commenting on spirit or ghost boxes, and those stories featured the new psychic wonder kid on the block, one Cale O'Donnell. And it's interesting because for some reason the media seem to think that these ghost boxes are something new or novel or amazing or whatever. They've been around for years. I've seen them for years. They are understandable and understood. What's really happening? Find out with Kenny Biddle, and you will have the chance to interpret a ghost message for yourself. Are you there, spirits? Hello? Following that, it's the Australian Skeptics Newsletter, read expertly once again by Adrienne Hill from Skookum Studios in Canada. And to round off the show, keeping in the spirit, if I might say that, keeping in the spirit of ghosts and things that go bump in the night, Trove, the Trove segment, will look at talking with the dead. Whenever I try to talk to the dead, I get mostly static. Now, I've had a couple of very interesting days here in the Bay Area because today, California time, so if you've just downloaded this episode of the show and you're in the Bay Area, today being Saturday the 12th, yes, it all sort of makes sense with time zones, I'll be appearing at the Berkeley Public Library to present my workshop called The Skeptical Box of Tricks. And reading the blurb, it says, ever wanted to learn how to bend a spoon just like the psychics? Or what about those people who use divining rods? Just how do they seem to be able to find water? Maybe you'd like to discover the truth behind those amazing patches and wristbands that claim to improve your balance and strength. All these fascinating topics and more will be covered in this workshop hosted by one of Australia's leading investigators into claims of the paranormal, me. As a bonus, Richard, an expert in the ancient art of origami, will be teaching you how to make some classic paper models. Indeed, I will. And this will be, as I said, at the Berkeley Public Library, today being Saturday here in the United States, at 3 p.m. 3 p.m. For more details, just head to baskeptics.org. And the reason I've had a couple of interesting days is I've been sourcing spoons. Oh yes, I've discovered interesting catering and restaurant stores here in the Bay Area. Been traveling on lots of buses and walking some distance in very strange parts of Oakland to find giant restaurant stores. Catering, very interesting. Anyway, I've got all these spoons ready to go. So if you're in the area, please come by and attend the workshop. Now, just before we get stuck into the show, I'd like to mention that I was a guest on Susan Gerbic's video series talking about the Great Australian Psychic Prediction Project, and I'll add a link to that in this week's show notes. But now it's time for me to run out the door, run down to Japantown, and I wonder if I can find some yummy Japanese pancakes. I tell you, folks, the time I had Japanese pancakes a couple of years back in the beautiful little coastal town of Anglesea in Victoria, All my culinary dreams came true at once. They are delicious, especially if they're made by somebody who really knows what they're doing. While I do all that, I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone. And joining me now on the line from beautiful Buffalo in New York, a place I want to visit. I will one day, I'm sure, and when I'm there, I'm sure to visit Kenny Biddle. Hello, Kenny.
Hey, how you doing, Richard?
I'm doing really well. I'm in California at the moment, stinking hot California. It's a warm one in the Bay Area. I can promise you that it's a warm one. But I want to talk about cold and spooky nights in graveyards with you. How about that?
Oh, wow. This conversation took a turn real quick.
It did. I would rather be in a cold and spooky graveyard right now than a blazing, baking. We're going to be talking, Kenny, about something I know you know a lot about. I've seen these in action. I haven't had a great deal of experience with them. And it's the strange device known as either a ghost box or a spirit box. So for the sake of our audience, and you know far more than me, what's the lowdown? What are we talking about?
So basically, these boxes, whether a ghost box or a spirit box, it's a modified radio. That's all it is. It's a radio that normally receives AM and FM transmissions, and it's modified so that when you scan for the next frequency, so usually you can hit, scan or next, and it goes to the next available frequency that comes in with music or talk radio or whatever. But instead of stopping at each station or on the next station, it continues to sweep through. So you're getting this constant sweep through all of the available stations, and you're getting a mix of static and little tidbits of music and talk radio and commercials and all kinds of stuff. And the idea behind it is that ghost hunters believe that ghosts can somehow, I don't know how, but somehow manipulate these sounds and speak through the radio and answer questions. So that's the basic idea.
Now, I've thought about this in a couple of ways because I first saw this device 6-7 years ago when I went on a ghost tour with our reporter Maynard, and the ghost group at the time had a ghost box, a spirit box. And I was trying to determine the logic or the reasoning behind it. And it occurred to me that, and I probably was wrong, but it occurred to me at the time that ghosts must be able to look into the future a couple of seconds and direct the frequency of the scanner. So they know that the broadcaster who's announcing the weather or something is going to say a part of the word the or Fred or or something. And they make this. And then that occurred to me as about as logic as any other reason.
It would have to, I would take it a step further and say they have to manipulate space and time, because they have to know, they'd have not only to know when something is going to be said, but they have to line it up with the sweeping of the radio itself. Yeah. So they have to shift the timeline in order to coincide with the question that you, a mere mortal, asks.
You're too skeptical, Kenny. This is the spirit world. Everything's possible. But then I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think the main claim is that those voices you are hearing are not random radio announcers telling you the football results or something. They're actually spirits manipulating the airwaves?
Yes, the white noise and the static. They manipulate it and create their own voice, and they can change the wording and all this. So, I mean, honestly, being a ghost sounds really cool. I mean, you get all these superpowers. You can float, you can turn invisible, you can walk through things, and you can manipulate radio waves at will.
Would it be a case then, Kenny, if, for example, you went somewhere with somebody with a spirit box, or you had one, and for a minute or two you let it go, let it do its thing, but at the same time you're recording 2 or 3 local AM stations? Could you then go back and compare the recording of the spirit box and the recording of the radio and find where the bits of the words actually match up?
I absolutely believe you can. Yeah. And that's an experiment I would love to try. except most of the areas that I'm in, there are dozens and dozens of radio stations. So I'd have to have everything hooked into one recording so I can record all of these lines coming in and time-stamped and all that. But I mean, it's something that can be done. And then you can go back and match up and figure out what station broadcasted what, when.
What's the history? How long has spirit boxes been around, do you know?
I think they've been around since the 90s. There was the first one that I came across it was called the Radio Shack Hack. And it's actually an old Radio Shack radio. It's a white radio that you would open up, and there was a connection in there that was for the scanning function. And you cut this connection, and that way it didn't allow the radio to stop at each station. It just kept rolling by. It kept sweeping through the stations. And that was the first time I did it. And that was in the late 90s, I believe, when I did that. And then other ghost hunters that were more on the let's make some gadgets and sell them at high prices caught on to this and started designing their own, especially with the advent of 3D printers and then just vacuum form plastic cases and stuff like that. They started putting the electronics out from radios into their own boxes. There was also a gentleman named Frank Sumption that created these Frankenstein radios. They were literally just parts of a radio all cobbled together in wooden boxes. And he put them out as Frank's boxes, and people would listen to them, and it would scan through the frequencies. And he kept saying he was communicating with different ghosts or spirits. And every time he made one, he claimed that he changed something. So something was always different, yet it always did the same thing. So they've been around for a while, and they've gotten smaller and more, I guess, cooler looking. Little functions. Now you can change the speed, like the model that the psychic guy was using. You can change the sweeping speed, I think, from 100 milliseconds up to 300 or 400 milliseconds. So it just goes through faster. And that's the idea, like, oh, the faster you go, the less time it has to spend on each station. Yet when I zoomed in on that clip that you had with this guy, I noticed that he had it on the slowest setting, which allows for you to hear more of the station because you get that bleed through between the few increments before and after that when the radio station comes in perfectly clear.
Yeah, it's I can't recall the model I saw many years ago, but it really did sound just the same. And it occurred to me that the story that we're referring to, and I'll link to this story in the show notes, folks, so you can see it for yourself, but he was running around a cemetery in the middle of a city. You can imagine how many frequencies are active.
Right. And you have to also take into account, like, these radios, they are radios. They're doing exactly what they're designed to do. So you're getting news reports, which has everything from like current events, dates, numbers, advertisements for furniture, food, events that are in the area, historical events. You're getting music, you're getting everything. There's sports. I mean, you can get any answer that you want, especially when you're only getting part of the word.
And I guess if you had the settings as such that you would get longer fragments, then the magic would disappear, because suddenly you would hear the word dog food or something like that, because they're advertising dog food, or you'd get whole, proper words or something like that. But what we're talking about, of course, here, Kenny, is something you know full well, is the phenomena called audio pareidolia. This is why you can hear static and random noises and bits of words, and your brain almost by default will make sense. We've been evolved to make sense out of randomness, so to speak. That's why we see ducks in the clouds and so on. And like to do an experiment with everybody. And I'd sent you the clips before, but what I'll do now, folks, is I'll play some clips from the story, and you can hear the ghosts speaking for yourself. I'm going to play 5 clips, and, listening at home, see if you can hear what the ghosts are saying. So here's clip 1.
Laura, how are you today? In the spirit world. You learn to train your hearing to it, but it's...
Laura said that.
Yeah.
All right. Now here's clip 2.
I heard a female say here. Is there anything you want to tell us?
Here's clip 3.
And
Clip 4.
are you seeing Mel, the cameraman?
And finally, clip 5.
We're doing a story with Kyle Anthony. How do you think it's going to come out?
Now, I sent this list to our colleague Celestia Ward over at Squaring the Strange podcast, and this is what she determined. So she said for clip 1, she couldn't discern words. She just heard clicks, which is interesting. For clip 2, she heard the following: no, ooah, ooah. Interesting. For clip 3, she heard the word health. Health. There you go. For clip 4, she heard the word trip. And in clip 5, she heard the words break it. And I found that absolutely fascinating. What did you make out of those clips when you heard them?
So in the first clip, I heard some music. I heard a quick clip of music, and I went back a couple times and like, yeah, that sounds like it hit a music station. And then I heard a bunch of clicks. I did hear that. Almost like it reminded me of the Predator movies with the little clicks that it does. For number 2, I heard something like "you run."
You run. Interesting. Yeah.
Clip 3, I heard stroke pebble.
Wow.
Yeah. Number 4, I heard something like tread. I heard that tread, as in like tread on me or tread on this. And then clip 5 was actually funny. I heard freaking. like this is freaking stupid.
That's interesting.
There you go. But again, I want to clarify that I was listening for something, and this is what I see ghost hunters do all the time. I was listening for an answer to the question.
Yeah.
You know, like if there was a question to it, I was listening specifically for that. So anything that popped up, and I ignored other sounds. Like I had to go back and listen, because at one point I did hear like the word no in one of the clips, but it was as he was still talking.
Okay.
So I didn't consider that an answer.
So now we know what you think, Kenny, and we know what Celestia Ward at Squaring the Strange thinks or thinks she heard. Is there anybody else there who's heard these clips?
There is. I reached out to my buddy Eric, who is our outreach coordinator, and he is in the office next to me, and I asked him what he thought was being said. And so he listened to all the clips, and he's got his own answers.
Interesting. Well, let's quickly play clip 1 again.
Laura, how are you today? In the spirit world. You learn to train your hearing to it, but it's...
Laura said that.
Yeah.
Okay, Eric, what did you hear?
In clip 1, it sounded like I might have heard him somebody say good.
Interesting. All right, well, let's hear clip 2 again.
I heard a female say here. Is there anything you want to tell us?
All right, what did you think about clip 2?
In clip 2, I may have heard a man's voice say something, sounded like he run.
He run. Okay, that's great. Let's try clip 3.
Clip 3, I distinctly heard the word no.
Right, interesting. How about clip 4?
Are you seeing Mel, the cameraman?
Clip 4 was interesting. I thought I might have heard threat or thread.
Threat or thread. Okay. And finally, clip 5.
We're doing a story with Kyle Anthony. How do you think it's going to come out?
Clip 5, I thought I heard the word great.
The word great. Thanks, Eric. That's really interesting. The more people who hear this what we call audio pareidolia, the more interesting it is for us. Now, for you, Kenny, Eric, and Celestia listening, and everybody listening, here are the full clips. So here's clip 1.
Laura, how are you today? In the spirit world? I'm good, thank you. You learn to train your hearing to it, but it said, I'm good, thank you.
Laura said that.
Yeah.
Now here's clip 2.
I heard a female say here. Is there anything you want to tell us? No.
No,
Doesn't want to say anything.
you've been rejected.
I've been rejected from a spirit.
Here's clip 3.
Mel. It said Mel.
Mel.
Yeah. Did you hear Mel?
Yeah.
Clip 4.
Are you seeing Mel, the cameraman? News. Did you hear news?
Yeah.
They know that we're here for the news.
And finally, clip 5.
We're doing a story with Kyle Anthony. How do you think it's going to come out?
All good. Did you hear all good?
Oh, good.
All right, now that's interesting, all those different answers we've got. It's impossible for me to do it because I've watched the clip when it came out and I've been studying the clip. I've been, what's the word? I'm contaminated. I cannot unhear what other people have suggested I should hear. And this is the big thing about,
Primed.
I'm primed, thank you. This is the big thing about pareidolia, audio pareidolia in many cases. If you're primed to hear something, that's what you hear. I mean, the wonderful classic example is brain freeze, green needle. If you think the words brain freeze and you hear this electronic voice, that's exactly what you hear. If you think the words green needle and you hear the same clip, you will hear green needle. It's interesting, Kenny, when the psychic said to the reporter, did you hear the words and whatever the words were? And the reporter said, yeah, because the psychic just said the words. And suddenly it made sense to the reporter. But I've listened to those again and again, and I've slowed them down. They're sounds. They're bits of speech. They're sounds. We've had you, we've had Eric, we've had Celestia listen to them. You've all come up with interesting and varied answers. Of course you have. So it's really no mystery, is it?
It's not. And I mean, this isn't the first time or the last time I'll deal with something like this. But many years ago, I did an experiment. I actually wrote it up with a couple friends of mine where we sent out clips just like this. We sent out clips with just the radio kind of broadcast, sweeping through the channels. And then we sent the same one out with a question for context. And we did it out I think we did about 100 people that responded. And we got completely different answers from everyone. And it just goes to show you, like, this is not communication. This is not intelligent communication. This is not anything except listening to the radio and us primed or we're waiting. We have an expectation. That's what it is.
Yeah.
We have a question and we have an expectation of what an answer will be, and we're listening specifically for that. In these clips, if you listen to the whole news clip, and then you listen to a whole bunch of other people doing the same kind of thing, listen to how many noises they ignore. They just completely ignore. They pick out the answer that fits what they want, and they ignore everything else.
It's very true. When he's listening to the spirit box, you hear lots of bits of fragments and bits of words, lots, and suddenly it's like, oh, the spirit said good morning, and think, huh, what, you know?
Right. Like, I want something to come across just like you and I are speaking now.
Wouldn't that be nice?
That would be. It's not going to happen, but
it's probably not going to happen. What a fascinating thing it is. I think you and I, Kenny, will have to take a spirit box out to the middle of the country, Probably in Australia, because, you can go to places in Australia where you don't get much radio at all. And that's when the spirits tend to not be very chatty, I would think.
I'm game for it. I have a whole bunch sitting out in a display case out in the office here. So I'll bring one. We can see if we can talk to somebody's grandmother.
Probably somebody's great-grandmother who happens to be your spirit guide.
There you go.
In fact, I know, Kenny, that your great-grandmother on your father's side is right there with you. She's your spirit guide, and she's looking after you.
It's kind of creepy.
It is a little bit creepy. It is indeed. Kenny Biddle, all the way over there in beautiful Buffalo. How can people find out more about you and get in touch?
Oh, you can get in touch with me through the Skeptical Inquirer website, skepticalinquirer.org. All my work is on there, and you can email me at kbiddle@centerforinquiry.org if you want to know more or have questions.
Excellent. Kenny, I look forward to one day having a real spirit with you.
I agree. We really, really need to do that.
I'm sure it'll happen. But for now, Kenny Biddle, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Hello, fellow skeptics. Nathan Eggins here, aka Conspiracy of One. I hope you've been enjoying the new skeptically themed songs from my upcoming debut album, Road to Reason. For my Brisbane friends, I'll be celebrating the album's release at a very special live performance at the Brisbane Planetarium on 20th of August. If you or anyone you know who enjoys science, music, and a few jokes, I welcome you to the Brisbane Planetarium on 20th of August. All information and tickets, as well as more of my skeptical music, can be found at conspiracyofonesolo.com. I'll see you again soon.
Hello everyone, this is Adrienne Hill from Skookum Studios in Calgary, Canada, and I'm here to read the highlights from the Australian Skeptics Newsletter, one of my favorite things to do every 2 weeks. This is newsletter number 179, and you can subscribe to this newsletter and get it delivered to your inbox every week, complete with links to all the stories. Just visit www.skeptics.com.au. And now let's see what Tim Mendham has for us this week. Hi all, says Tim. A jam-packed newsletter with everything packed in, apart from jam. It's a busy world with U.S. Congresspeople, especially noteworthy as they struggle with alien claims with no evidence, no eyewitnesses, no scientists. So it must be true. They need some input from good old skeptical philosophy, also included here. Read on, Tim. Okay, Tim, I'll do just that. Chase Bank closes anti-vaxxers' accounts. JP Morgan Chase is understood to be cancelling vaccine skeptic Joseph Mercola's business account and the personal accounts of Mercola Markets' CEO, his wife, and the company's CFO. But there seems to be some confusion as to why the accounts will be closed and whether the decision can or will be countermanded. UFO hearings. How top scientists reacted to revelations. In a session of the House Oversight Committee investigation of claims regarding UFOs, witnesses testified that the government had been aware of non-human activity since the 1930s. Academics said that it was possible that aliens could have visited Earth, but it was, quote, difficult to imagine, end quote, them doing so, and that the witnesses had provided, quote, insufficient data, end quote, to form an opinion on the matter. Brian Cox, one of the top scientists, was not impressed. Quote, I watched a few clips and saw some people who seemed to believe stuff saying extraordinary things without presenting extraordinary evidence. End quote. Meanwhile, how seriously is Congress taking UFOs? Others have added their views. No evidence, only hearsay, and no scientific input. Quote, it's astonishing it's come this far, end quote, says skeptic Michael Shermer. But it is, quote, part of this legitimately historic shift in serious people having serious conversations around this topic, end quote, says an American journalist who studies the UFO phenomenon. Quote, and it's very clear that some people have been successful in getting the ear of certain politicians, end quote, says a third. More meanwhile. House Intelligence Chairman's UFO skepticism draws consternation from some Republicans. Republican Representative Mike Turner has drawn the consternation of some fellow party members over his apparent reluctance to support legislation aimed at providing greater transparency on unidentified flying objects. Representative Tim Burchett, Republican from Tennessee, referenced the obstruction of a UFO-related amendment he had offered regarding the Federal Aviation Administration. Burchett suggested that defense contractors were using campaign donations to influence members of Congress against UFO-related transparency efforts. He told assembled journalists, quote, I think it would be wise for you to start looking at some financial disclosures of some of those corporations, some of the people who do the stonewalling in this town, end quote. Ah, conspiracy theories about UFOs. Who'd have thought it? And this from the political party, one of whose members thought that if you had too many people on the island of Guam, it would topple over. And more, meanwhile. 5 biblical reasons for skepticism on UFO testimony. The title really says it all. Pseudo-archaeology is dangerous. TV program Ancient Astronauts is a, quote, fundamental challenge to how knowledge is created. And that's the dangerous part of what this guy does, end quote. This program was actually a couple of years ago, but this rebuttal and warning from IFLS, and we won't spell that out, has only just appeared. Elon Musk's skepticism of COVID and vaccines. Musk hops on the died suddenly conspiracy movement about the dangers of COVID vaccines. He questioned why Bronny James, college basketball player and son of LeBron James, went into cardiac arrest, linking the medical emergency without evidence to the COVID-19 vaccine in a recent tweet, the latest in a series of questionable and sometimes false comments from Musk. Psychology behind alien abduction reports. False memories, sleep disorders, and masochism are linked to paranormal beliefs. In some cases, paranormal reports may stem from false memories, which are surprisingly easy to implant. Dream reality confusion is common among persons with sleep disorders, which can lead to dream delusions. And one interesting proposition that we hadn't heard before: sexual masochists are especially susceptible to false memories and dream reality confusion involving aliens. Skepticon 2023. Tickets for convention and dinner. Tickets are now available for Skepticon 2023, the 39th Australian Skeptics Annual National Convention. Visit skepticon.org.au for all the information. Skeptics in Action. If you have any ideas for stories or want to contribute to Skeptics communications, such as the magazine or Facebook page, or just have something you want to get off your chest, then you're welcome to get in touch. News leads should be sent to newstips@skeptics.com.au. Submissions for the magazine, etc. should go to editor@skeptics.com.au. Comments and suggestions should also go to editor@skeptics.com.au. Items of interest. Travel tip. With a rich history steeped in legends and ghostly tales, the village of Pluckley in Kent has become a magnet for paranormal enthusiasts and curious visitors alike. Watch out for the Watercress Woman, Fright Corner, Screaming Wood, and the Phantom Carriage of Frightful Lane. I want to go there. This guide to a 3-hour walking tour gives you some background, but sadly, no photos. Silly Story of the Week. Best sense for your star sign. A celebrity psychic says you should look at your birth sign before choosing a scent this summer, particularly if you're hoping for romance. Now, with regard to the summer, there's a little asterisk here because the story does not say whether they're referring to the northern or southern hemisphere summer. Judging by the recent heat records in the northern, antiperspirant might be a better option. British-Israeli astrologer Inbal Hodgman says certain star signs work better with certain fragrance notes, and you should make sure you have a compatible match before spritzing scents. Your editor, apparently, smells best with, quote, fragrances such as unconventional lavender, airy sage, or aquatic accords best suit them, end quote. Not sure what airy sage or aquatic accords are, but lavender's an old lady smell, isn't it? I like lavender. I guess I'm an old lady. Worst article of the week. Exploring the Enigma. Haunted churches around the world. Don't read this unless you want to be so totally underwhelmed that you will be underwhelmed until the end of Underwhelmdom. Probably the least in-depth article we have ever read. Basically a sentence or two on each aspect of haunted churches. Surely, this must be an AI job. Well, that was fun. Now I think I need to run upstairs, head outside, and grab a double-double from Tim Hortons to keep me going for the rest of the day. A double-double, you ask? A double-double, you ask? No, this is not some sports term for basketball that I'm referring to. It is a phrase popularized by the Canadian donut and coffee chain named after its founder and former National Hockey League player, Tim Horton. The term double-double became so common in Canada that it was added to the Oxford Canadian Dictionary in 2004. According to said dictionary, a double-double is, quote, a cup of coffee with a double amount of both cream and sugar, end quote. Until next time, this is Adrienne Hill. A double-double, you ask? A double-double, you ask?
You've probably heard the saying, knowledge is power. While that's true, there's just too much to know. Plus, we carry access to nearly all of humanity's knowledge in our pockets. Unfortunately, there's also a lot of misinformation out there. Conspiracy theories, propaganda, pseudoscience, science denial, all of which are effective because they appeal to our biases and emotions. As Richard Feynman reminded us, no one can fool us like we can. Protecting yourself from misinformation requires better thinking. When you need reliable information, do you know where to find it and how to use it to make wise decisions? And importantly, are you aware of the thinking errors that might cause you to fall for misleading information? The bottom line is knowledge is not enough. Thinking is power. I'm science educator and communicator Melanie Teresa King. Please visit thinkingispower.com to learn more about critical thinking, information literacy, and science literacy skills. Educators can find useful and engaging course materials and assignments for their students. And for a daily-ish dose of better thinking, follow Thinking is Power on X, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube.
Here we go once once again back to the Trove archives at trove.nla.gov.au, of course the wonderful resource for the whole world to dive into the pages of Australian history via newspapers, magazines and so on. This wonderful resource is fully searchable. Type in your search and it will trawl through, I guess you'd have to say, millions of articles and reports and stories looking for key words and keeping in line with our general theme of skepticism, of course. This week I looked up the term, the words, talking with the dead. Of course, talking with the dead is one of the oldest claims of supernatural ability around, I guess, and it's one of the things that I've always been interested in. More recently, since I've been doing skepticism in the last quarter of the century, of course it's been more or less the stage mediums talking to the dead, like the John Edwards or the Sylvia Brown, the ones I've seen here in person in Australia, which are numerous, include names like Margaret Birkin and Margaret Dent, the amazing Valda. All of these people I've written about in the pages of the Skeptic magazine. The amazing Valda. She was one of the first ones I saw way back in the early 2000s, and she was saying how she could see dead people from 9/11 running around the theatre. Keep it classy. Anyway, let's look into the pages of Australian newspapers going back a very long time to see references to talking with the dead. And we start with the Daily Standard from Brisbane, Queensland, dated the 23rd of September 1922, over 100 years ago. Talking with the dead. Mr. R.A. Kinnemonth, what a name, the representative of IBSA Melbourne, is going to lecture in the Elite Theatre on Sunday evening, taking as his subject, Talking with the Dead. This should prove of great interest to all, especially our spiritualistic friends. Mr. Kinnemonth has had a great reputation in Brisbane and feels grateful to all who have come from near and far to hear him. This will be his last effort this session. 1922. So many times when I'm reading these reports, I wish I could have been at the events. I wonder what sort of talk that was. And now we turn to the pages of the Darling Downs Gazette, dated the 3rd of June 1920, and the reproduction here is spotty at best. I think I can get through this. I can piece together what this is trying to say. It's a very old newspaper, and I guess this is the best reproduction they could do. On Sunday evening last in the Masonic Hall, an interesting address was delivered by Mr. W. M. Johnson of the IBSA. I'm not sure what the IBSA is. On the subject, quote, "Do the dead really communicate?" End quote. And I've found it here, IBSA, International Bible Students Association. The speaker said that the Great World War had elevated the subject to one of great importance. The world was full of bereavement. Sorrowing relatives were everywhere crying out for the touch of a vanished hand, and were eager to know the state and condition of their beloved dead. That reminds me of a comic I saw years ago, of a seance or something, and the spiritualist is saying, "I'm trying to contact Fred," and you hear this voice, "This is Fred. How are you, Fred?" "I'm dead." "Spiritualism," said Mr. Johnson, maintaining that the dead are not dead, and that communication is possible, but unfortunately for the argument, the evidence leaves much to be desired. Even Sir A.C. Doyle, Ah, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. It's amazing how often his name appears in these sort of stories. Even Sir A.C. Doyle, and the next word is obliterated. It starts with A.D., and the rest is simply not reproduced very well here. I can't see what it is. The next word is in his revelation, page 123, that they had to deal with much that is cold-blooded lying and deception on the part of the communicating intelligences. The speaker denied emphatically that the dead communicate, and in proof entered into an exhaustive analysis of the human personality. He showed that science testified to the fact of man's mortality, that he was of the earthy, it says. Consciousness, the power to think, speak, and act, was dependent entirely upon human organism, and could not operate apart from the brain. The arrestment of the brain function by accident or the administration of an anesthetic terminated consciousness for the time being, and arrestment be permanent, as in death cessation of consciousness would also be permanent. Again, the writing here is not very clear. For the dead to communicate anything, said the speaker, was a physical impossibility. No immortal part of the human organism had ever been discovered, either in the dissecting room or the laboratory, and, he maintained, such was not to be found in the scriptures. Just here, Mr. Johnson offered to write a cheque for £100 in favour of anyone who could find in the English, Greek, or Hebrew scriptures such expressions as the immortal soul, the ever-living, or never-dying soul, or the equivalent. On the contrary, the scriptures showed that the dead know not anything, and they are sound asleep, unconscious, and therefore unable to communicate anything whatsoever. From whence, then, came the messages received by the spiritualists? Mr. Johnson maintained that they were the work of demon-fallen spirits. Oh, well, who at one time had free intercourse with humanity, but who became of and then the word is obliterated. It's trans something, and then the story ends. A little bit of a strange story, that one. Sort of skeptical, sort of. But now let's see what the pages of the Herald from Melbourne, Victoria had to say on the 26th of May, 1930. Talking to the dead by radio. Oh, I wonder if this is an early example of EVP. Mr. Fisk's prediction. Sydney, Monday. This talk of communicating with Mars leaves me cold, said the managing director of Amalgamated Wireless Limited, Mr. E.T. Fisk, when speaking to members of the Millionaires Club today. But I believe that sometime in the future, wireless will enable us to communicate reliably with our friends who have departed from this life. Mr. Fisk also forecast the transmission of power on such a scale as to enable aeroplanes and steamers to be driven by current sent by beam from a generating station on land. Talking to the dead on the radio, or via the radio. Now here's an interesting one, repeated or reproduced in various newspapers. At the time being around 1920, this one's on the 4th of December 1920, and the Western Star and Roma Advertiser from Queensland. Edison's latest, communicating with the dead. Mr. Thomas Edison announces today, states the New York correspondent of The Times, writing on October 2, that he is perfecting a mechanical instrument by which he expects to establish free communication with the dead. The outline of Edison's latest endeavour are set forth in an interview in the American magazine, together with a challenge by the inventor to exponents and supporters of hitherto accepted theories of spirit communication, and a prediction that the establishment of successful communication with the spirit world can never be achieved, quote, through any childish contraptions which seem so silly to the scientist, end quote. In brief, Edison's key to communication with the dead consists of a super-sensitive instrument so responsive to spirit impulses as to register and transmit them to mortals. He says, quote, "I have been at work for some time, building an apparatus to see if it is possible for persons who have left this earth to communicate with us. If this is ever accomplished, it will be accomplished not by occult, mystifying, mysterious, and weird means, such as are employed by so-called mediums, but by scientific methods. If those who have left the form of life we have on earth cannot use or affect the apparatus I am going to give them, then the chance of there being a hereafter of the kind we think about and imagine disappears." Very high opinion of his own prowess there. "On the other hand, it will be a tremendous sensation if it is successful." End quote. So there we are, talking with the dead, communicating with the dead, hearing what the dead have to say. Lots of dead air. That's a very bad joke. What do the dead think? Dead reckoning? There must be more dead jokes than that. This parrot is dead. So many instances in the pages of Australian newspapers about communicating with the dead. I was only just scratching the surface there. We might revisit that another time. But you don't have to wait till then to see what Trove has to offer. If you go to Trove at trove.nla.gov.au, type in your search criteria because you never know what you might find. Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast this week. Coming up on next week's show, we have an interview with Janice Boyington about facilitated communication. And this is a discussion with Adrienne Hill and Susan Gerbic. And you might remember on last week's episode, Tim Mendham in the Book of Tim spoke about facilitated communication. Of course, this is where autistic people, for example, and other people who have very great difficulty in communicating are, well, appears to be assisted by other people guiding their hands as they write words and so on. Anyway, that's coming up on next week's show. And in the Trove segment, we're going to look at references to chiropractic in the annals of Australian newspapers. Thank you to those people who continue to support the Skeptic Zone at PayPal or Patreon. And of course, if you go to skepticzone.tv, you can follow the links and join in and show your support financially with micropayments or donations to the show. And while you're there, scroll to the top of the page. Well, I guess if you click on the link or you go there, you're at the top of the page anyway, and you can see the YouTube link and the TikTok link. Yes, you can follow the Skeptic Zone on TikTok. But now it's time for me to get ready for my workshop this afternoon at 3 p.m. in the Berkeley Public Library. Hope to see you there. But for now, this is Richard Saunders signing off from Oakland, California. You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for show notes, contacts, and to access the back catalogue of episodes going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone podcast on Twitter at Skeptic Zone, visit our Facebook page, or leave a review on iTunes. You can also support the Skeptic Zone via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone podcast is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed on the Skeptic Zone are not necessarily those of Australian skeptics or any other skeptical organisation. Welcome to those people who listen after the music. It's time for the dice game. Haven't played this for a little while. And I'm on this table here. You can hear the dice rattling around. It's a 10-sided die. I'm going to roll it 3 times, and you use your psychic mystic magic power. If you're wondering what's in the background on the TV is a UFO documentary. Oh, good grief. And the aliens are hovering over this poor woman covered with a sheet. Go figure. Anyway, going to roll this dice 3 times, and you use your psychic power to guess which numbers come up. Here we go. Roll number 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10. 7. 7. You write that down. 7, right. Roll number 2, here it comes. 8. 7, 8. Last roll. Susan, will it be number 5? Here we go. On the carpet, on the floor, it's another 8. 7, 8, and 8. And of course the supplementary. One more. Use your psychic power. What will it be? Here it comes. 6, 7, 8, 8, and 6.
With a rich history steeped in legends and ghostly tales, the village of Pluckley in Kent has become a magnet for dogs, apparently. A double-double is, quote, a cup of coffee. Cup of coffee